All right. Well, we have a lot going on this day, today, but I think we will actually have time for everything. We have 2 student-led discussions today, and we have 2 next week too. So, so that means you don't have to listen to me as much. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, it's March 4th. Okay, so here's the plan for today. I'm going to talk some about the theory of planned behavior, and I'm going to fold into that a little bit more on measurement, because every time I get to measurement, I feel like I'm rushing and not really saying everything that I want to say. We're going to have the student-led discussion on theory of planned behavior, and we'll have 45 minutes for that. And if it takes less time, that's okay, but we have 45 minutes. Then we'll move on to theory of social cognitive theory. I'll talk about that for a little bit. There's a student-led discussion on that. And then I pushed our small behavior groups to the end of the session and have an idea there that you could talk about how social norms and observational learning affect your behavior, but maybe we'll change that as we go, depending on what seems more interesting by the time we get there. And we will have 2 breaks. We'll just have to sort of see where they fall. It's always hard for me to predict how long things are going to take, but I'll make sure that we have 2 breaks. I think what we're going to do is take a break before this first student-led discussion, and then probably, I don't know, we'll see where the second break falls best. So I wanted to show you this. I just finished reading this book. I don't know, has anybody else read this book? I can't really see you all, so I don't see nobody's like waving their hand. Oh, Maggie, have you read it? Yeah.
Yeah, I read it last winter with a couple of friends in a little book group, and it was thus far the best anti-racist and I don't know, racism conscious book that I've read ever.
Well, that's good to hear. I would agree with that. I think it's maybe only my 3rd book, so maybe I don't have a huge sampling, but I would agree based on the ones that I've read so far. Yeah, we have some faculty in our department have a book group, and we just finished reading this. And I came across this, I don't know, towards the end of the book, and I thought it would be interesting to reflect on it a little bit. So in this book, he really, at least this is how I experienced the book, is he's really talking about his own journey from basically kindergarten, or maybe even before kindergarten, up through the time when he wrote the book, his own journey to become an anti-racist. And he talks many times throughout the book about the thoughts he had and the things he did that he now considers racist. But one of the things he said, and I didn't put the exact quote because the quote is in a context where it made it too confusing to try to explain it, but he basically says that race isn't a social construct, it's a power construct. And we in this class have talked about race being a social construct, and I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts about it as a power construct, which is, I would say it's a special kind of a social construct. And I'm going to stop my share for a minute. So thoughts about race as a power construct.
My initial gut reaction is absolutely. And I when you posted the little phrase, I was thinking the same thing that you just said, is that, but power really is a subset of a social construct. But yeah, I think it's absolutely a power construct.
Yeah, I was going to agree with that as well. My gut reaction is that they can almost be combined, and that social power is an extremely valuable thing. At least, in society, who makes the decisions, who holds the power. And so they can almost be combined, but I definitely agree with Michelle that that's my initial reaction as well.
And what does it mean to be a power construct?
I was going to say that it really it reflects how like the structural nature of racism today, and where like a social construct, I feel makes people think more of like personally mediated racism, while like a power construct reflects how it's been like institutionalized. And yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, this book, Maggie, I don't know if it was this way for you. It's a super complex book, and like I felt like I needed my book group met twice to talk about it. I feel like it would have really helped me if we met after every chapter, because every chapter is packed with a lot of ideas. But and as he talks about his own personal journey, he also weaves in a ton of history, and he talks about at one point about how the concept of race was invented. And I was trying to remember when he says it was invented, and I'm thinking it was like the 16 or 1700s. But he talks about it really the person, and he names the person who can first kind of set up, okay, there's going to be the whites and the blacks and the Asians and when it was set up, it really was to set up a hierarchy. Who's the powerful one, and who's the best, who's the second best, it's defined in that original concept of race back, whatever, 400 years ago or something, that there really was power built into the definitions when the different races were conceptualized. Which I think to me is different than as a social construct. It kind of seems neutral to me, like, oh, we could see differences in people, so we named those differences, but that's kind of neutral. But then if you add power on it, it really was not just to say, oh, that people look different and they come from different places, but some of us are better than others of us, and we will therefore have power, and we therefore have the right to enslave people was really the motivation, I think, then, but continues to be to put some people with unearned privilege over other people.
I was recently reading an article, actually for my capstone, Lori, so you'll be happy to know I'm getting progress on that. But it was a recent article, 2021, and talking about health equity, especially mental health equity. And it was basically taking away this social construct of racism and saying that it's a financial power situation where the people cannot get access, of minority statuses, because it's purely based on finances. Especially in the mental health community, they cannot afford good behavioral health clinicians. So it becomes this financial power question rather than a social construct, which I thought was really interesting.
Other thoughts?
Well, I just think all of this fits nicely into the history of our nation, with things like Manifest Destiny and, our founding fathers, as many good things as they did, they also did kind of codify this structure that you're talking about, Lori, in this hierarchy, in order to enrich themselves and other people in decision-making positions. So it's actually really disappointing to me. When you think about all of these different layers and levels, and you're taught your entire life like how great we are because we have opportunity for everybody, but we really don't. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh, we're kind of living a lie, and it's really disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. Mackenzie, you're still traveling, it looks like.
Yeah, I'm usually traveling. I'm here.
Hi. Okay, well, let's, any other thoughts before we move on? Oh, Maggie's, a great talk. So there's a link, Maggie's putting a link into the chat of a talk that Professor Kendi gave.
I felt like it was it brought in a lot of points from his book. So if you maybe don't have the time to get to his book right now, particularly the first half of it, it's long, it's like an hour and a half or something like that. But the first half of it is really great, and I think reflects a lot of his main points. And sometimes it's nice to just be able to hear somebody talk about their work and the research that he's done. And I really love that one. So I think it's a good resource.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so I wish I had a way to not, I'm always moving things around on the screen so that I can try to see you guys, but also see my slides. So in this class, we've talked about the socio-ecological model and these rings, and we started a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, really talking about things at the outer ring, and then we're moving towards the center. And last week we talked about social support, social networks, and social capital, which are pretty much in this interpersonal ring, people's connections with each other. And then today we're going to move into this intrapersonal, what's in people's heads that causes them to act in certain ways. And we're gonna be kind of straddling these two circles today. And then next week, the health belief model and the trans-theoretical model, also called stages of change, they're both really centered in this intrapersonal, what's in people's heads that make them do things. So today we're kind of going across these a little bit. And we're going to start with the theory of planned behavior. And the chapter on this also talks about the theory of reasoned action and the integrated behavioral model. And the history of these is that it started with the theory of reasoned action, then they added some things, it became the theory of planned behavior, and then pretty recently they pulled a whole bunch of things from other models, including the trans-theoretical model and social cognitive theory, into kind of making a super model that is this integrated behavioral model. I'm going to focus, and the article that the students are presenting on focuses on the theory of, oh, it just started snowing at my house, the theory of planned behavior. Okay, so this theory focuses on attitudes, perceived norms, control, and intentions. And this is what it looks like in a picture. And I'm going to go through these, but I wanted to show you the picture first. But the model itself is on the right side of this line. What they're saying is these things over here, like your demographic variables and personality traits, these sort of feed in, but the main elements of the model are right here. Well, everything on the right side of that, of the line. The key components are attitudes, subjective norms, and perceived controls that create an intention to perform a behavior, which then leads to the behavior. So I'm going to go into how they define these attitudes, subjective norm, and perceived control. So attitudes are the way the theory talks about them. They're a combination of expectations of outcomes and the value that we place on those outcomes. So in more normal language, it's what do you think will happen if you do something, and how important is that to you? So for example, do you think that eating poorly will cause heart disease? And how bad do you think it would be to have heart disease? So it might be that we think, well, yeah, eating poorly could cause heart disease, but I think having heart disease wouldn't be that bad, or maybe I would only have mild heart disease. And it's not that big of a deal. It seems to me like it's kind of hard to say that with something like heart disease, but you can imagine it with other things like, let's say flossing, which is my problem. So if you think that flossing can cause gum disease, you might not think gum disease is that bad. Or you might think, well, yeah, I might get gum disease, but the dentist can fix that for me. So it's not that bad. It's not like I'm going to die of gum disease. Now, I don't think we have any dental professionals in this class, but they would probably say, actually, you could probably die from gum disease because it could lead to heart disease, which could then lead to death. So, but a person could believe that gum disease is not that bad. So it's a combination of these. It's both what you think will happen if you do something and how bad it will be, or good or bad it will be. And then they also say that the attitude towards the behavior is a better predictor of the behavior than the attitude towards an object. And what they mean there is that the object in this case is heart disease, the behavior is eating healthy. So it's really my attitude about eating healthy that's more important than my attitude about heart disease. So what do I think are the good and bad things about eating healthy? Like, am I not going to like the food? Is it going to taste bad? Is it not going to fill me up? Is it not going to be the kind of food my friends are eating, so I don't want to eat it? So they're saying really it's not so much about that long-term outcome of heart disease. It's the more short-term outcome of eating healthy that is going to relate to my healthy eating behavior. So then the next major construct is, they actually call them subjective norms. I don't know, in my head, I call them perceived norms. It's the same thing, but it's the key is that norms are what most people do. So if I did a survey and I would find out that most people don't smoke cigarettes. I don't know, the smoking rates are probably something like 14% in the United States. I'm not really sure exactly what it is now. I know it keeps going down. So the norm is not smoking. That's sort of, we can measure that. Perceived norms are what we think people do. So often our perceived norms are different than the real norms. So for example, kids, like let's say 13-year-olds, they tend to think more kids are doing bad things than really are. So if you ask 13-year-olds how many kids are vaping, or how many kids are smoking, or how many kids are trying marijuana, they will overestimate. It's been found over and over in studies, kids overestimate the bad things that their peers are doing. So those are their perceived norms, and it's really the perceived norms that affect behavior rather than the actual norms. So sometimes in behavior change programs for kids, we try to correct their perceived norms. So if and it's done with college students, where if you survey college students, they think everybody parties on the weekend. But if you actually look at how many kids party on the weekend, it's not the norm. It's less than half, at least. I mean, I'll have to say, when I was in college, I thought everybody partied on the weekends. So but I never did the study to find out really how many were. But it's been found over and over again that college students overestimate how prevalent partying is. So programs are done on college campuses to try to correct that perceived norm and say, look, everybody doesn't get drunk on Friday night and Saturday night. Really, it's only 10 or 20% who are doing that. And that then helps those who are, it helps change behavior. So in this norm, perceived norms or subjective norms, what the model says is you need to know, so referent individuals are people that we refer to. They're the people in our social network. That's the language that the model uses. This model is focused on our perceptions of what important people to us think we should do. So do important referent individuals approve or disapprove of the behavior? So for example, if, people who smoke um, do people around them approve or disapprove of their behavior? And over time, over the last 50, 60 years, smoking has become less and less socially acceptable. So people who continued to smoke would encounter more and more disapproval among people around them. But the key is it the people that are important to you? What do they think? So in this theory, we need to find out who's important. So if you're a 13-year-old and you're thinking about trying marijuana, who are the important people to you? Well, it's probably your friends are the most important, and what your friends are doing. Your parents may also be important, your teachers, you may have a coach or a religious leader. So there are other people, but the key is who's really important to you related to that behavior. And you're going to be likely to do what you think the important people think you should do. So some kids are maybe more motivated by what their parents think. Other kids are more motivated by what their friends think. So we need to know who's important and what do you think those people think you should do? And then how much do you want to comply with those reference? So if your friends think you should try pot, then how motivated are you to do what your friends think you should do? If your parents think you shouldn't, how motivated are you to comply with what your parents think? So we need to know both who the important reference are and what they think. What they think. Let's see. In a kid, if it's a kid, who are the important reference, and what do they think the kid should do? What does the kid think they should do? And do they care what those people think? So do your parents approve? I can't see my example down here. You move your pictures around. Do your parents approve of vaping? Do you care what your parents think? And do you want to comply with what your parents think? Or are you more motivated to comply with what your friends think? Then the control beliefs, this is the key difference between the theory of reasoned action and the theory of planned behavior. They added this idea of control beliefs. And this is your belief that you have that you're able to do whatever it is you want to do. So if I'm a kid and I'm thinking about vaping and I think all my friends want me to vape and I really want to do what my friends want me to do I have access to vaping? Can I get the I forget what they're called, but the little thing that you use to vape, can I get that? Can I access that? And what are my, and again, it's beliefs that are important. It's not the actual access to it. It's the belief of the access. So that can become kind of important because when you're developing behavior change strategies, you can sometimes change the control belief. So like if I think, well, I can't exercise, I'm stuck at home, we're in a pandemic, I can't go to the gym, so I can't exercise. I want to exercise. My family wants me to exercise, but I can't exercise because I can't go to the gym. Well, in an intervention, you could convince people, no, you don't actually need to go to the gym. You can walk. You can safely walk outside. You can safely lift weights in your house. We can change people's control beliefs so that they can do a behavior that they want to do. In some cases anyway, we can reframe their belief about what is possible and what isn't possible. So, and then let's see this final bullet on this page. Control beliefs will be less important when volitional control is high. So volitional control is your I'm having trouble figuring out how to explain volitional control. I'm kind of blanking on that. If it's easy to do something, then the control beliefs are going to be less important than if it's something that's harder to do. So if it's something like, well, maybe if it's something like brushing your teeth, it's pretty easy to have access to a toothbrush and toothpaste. So the control beliefs are not going to be very important. It's going to be other things that are going to motivate. Probably whether or not I think gum disease is dangerous or not is going to control it more than or is going to affect my behavior more than my ability to control it, because it's pretty easy for me to control whether or not I brush my teeth. So then a really important part of this theory is behavior intention, and that's what you plan to do. So we could have everything in place. We could have the right attitudes. We could have the resources in order to do something. We could think that the people that are important to us socially think we should do it. That would predict our behavioral intention, but behavioral intention comes before behavior. So we don't always do the things that we intend to do. So that gets us back to the model here, where we've got the attitude, the subjective norm, the perceived control. They predict our intention to do something, and then our intention is the strongest predictor of the behavior itself. So a really important part of this model, and this ends up being a pretty effective model in predicting behavior. And the reason it's effective in predicting behavior is because the model says you need to do it for specific behaviors in specific populations. So you need to do research within, if you're working with Denver public school kids to prevent vaping, you need to do research within that population to find out what are the important attitudes, what are the perceived norms, what are the control factors for that population. So you by doing the research focused on a particular population, you can make the effects be pretty powerful according to research. But if you do it more generally, it's not gonna work as well. So I wanted to sort of interject a little bit more about measurement here, because measurement is really important with theory of planned behavior, how you measure things and then how you apply them in interventions to change behavior becomes really important. So we, I think a couple weeks ago, I think a couple weeks in a row, I've put up this slide with these targets, and I don't think I've ever really explained what these targets mean. So I want to explain what these targets mean. So you can see this one says accurate and consistent. This one says not accurate, but consistent. To just move your pictures around here again. Somewhat accurate, but not consistent. I'm going to just explain what these mean. So I think a couple weeks ago, I used the example of measuring, if I want to measure people's weight, but I don't have a scale, I only have a yardstick or, something that I can measure their height. If I were to measure height instead of weight, so let's say this is this on target, accurate and consistent. This is, I put people on a scale, I measure them the way you should measure weight on a scale. I have a precise scale like what they have at the doctor's office. If I measured people 6 times, I would get pretty close measurements every time, and I'd be right in the middle of that target. I would be able to accurately measure weight. But if I didn't have a scale and I was using a tape measure or a yardstick to measure someone's height instead of their weight, height and weight are pretty highly correlated. Certainly they're not completely correlated, because you could have a very tall person who's very thin. You could have a short person who's very heavy. So it's not going to be perfect, but I could measure height accurately. So this target over here would show, well, I want to be on the center of the target, and I'm up here because I can consistently measure height, but I'm not measuring the right thing. I'm measuring something related to weight, but I'm not measuring the right thing. So if I take my yardstick and I measure people over and over again, I can be very consistent, but I'm not measuring weight. I'm measuring height. So then this this target down here, the little dots are centered around the target, but they're more dispersed. They're sort of spread out a little bit. This would be an example where maybe I have a bathroom scale instead of a doctor. I'm not at a doctor's office. I've got a bathroom scale and I'm having people stand on it. And I don't know, maybe they've gotten more accurate, but the last time I had one, maybe I could get on and off of it twice right in a row and I would get a somewhat different measurement. And if I measure it in the morning, I'll get something different than if I measure it in the evening. So I'm measuring weight, but I'm not very consistent. I'm getting, they center around the target, but they're not right on the target. And then this final one would be, they're just sort of randomly everywhere. It's not accurate and it's not consistent. So it's not a good way to measure. And what we see in these studies, and the two student-led discussions today have examples where constructs and theories have been measured. So what we're generally doing is we're asking a number of questions in a survey. We're trying to get on this target, but we're not always on the target. And one of the ways to know if you're on target is this Cronbach's alpha. And I think both of the articles today report Cronbach's alphas. So we want them to be over 70.70. The higher, the better. And the idea is that you're asking a number of questions that are trying to get, and some of these articles talk about, or maybe both of the articles today talk about latent constructs. And I don't know if anybody wondered if they were reading, what the heck is a latent construct? And what it means is that we can't directly measure something like an attitude. There's no scale or yardstick by which we can know that we're measuring an attitude. So an attitude is an abstract thing. We can't directly measure it, but we can indirectly measure it by asking questions that relate to what we think that attitude is. But it's all abstract, and so a latent construct is something you can't measure directly, but you can measure it indirectly, and then you can use these statistical models to see if you've if the numbers that you're getting reflect that you're measuring something real. And what you're trying to do is develop questions that are all centered around a target and they're tight in like this. So this would be an example of a high Cronbach's alpha. This would be an example of a very low, maybe this is like a 0.2 Cronbach's alpha. Are there any questions about that? I think is my next slide that we can try this out.
So Lori, can we talk about Cronbach's alpha just a little bit more?
Yeah.
Because I think I am like dancing around understanding it, but I'm not sure that I'm really grasping it. Because it's often also referred to as internal consistency, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So does that mean like you have, I think the way you explained it before is that you have one overarching question, like, is someone lonely? And then you have like 4 or 5 subsets of questions that all relate to different ways that people can be lonely. Mm-hmm. And Cronbach's alpha makes sure that all of those sub questions really do relate to the primary question. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
It is. Yes, that's a great example. Then the other piece of it is, are you correctly defining it? So you could create a bunch of, let's say, I'm trying to think of an example. So if it's about loneliness, I love that example. So we could ask people, how often during the day do you feel alone? And we could ask, I don't know, we could create 5 different questions about different aspects of loneliness. So Cronbach's alpha will tell us, are they measuring the same thing? And this is where I wish I had a chalkboard and we were in a room, but I would draw a Venn diagram with circles, overlapping circles. And each of those questions that you're asking, each of the 5 questions about loneliness, they're all getting at somewhat different aspect of loneliness, but they all overlap. And that overlapping piece is the sort of center of the target. And so you're trying to ask slightly different things that are all getting around that target. But you could be just all over the place. Like maybe maybe I'm going too far away from the concept of loneliness. I'm trying to think of an example, like maybe you ask, oh, when you exercise, do you exercise alone? Well, I exercise alone, but that doesn't mean I'm lonely, because that's how I exercise. So we could be mistaken in how we defined loneliness, and we might end up with a pattern like this one down here, where, you know, maybe this question way out here is, do you exercise alone? And indeed, that's not really measuring loneliness. So Chromebox Alpha tells us how tightly together they are. It doesn't necessarily tell us that we're actually measuring loneliness. So that's where we have to really look at, well, what are the questions we asked, and do they really reflect, can we agree that they reflect the concept of loneliness? Did that help, Michelle?
Yes, thank you.
I love that. Loneliness is a great example. Are there other questions? So I thought we could try this with mask wearing, kind of applying COVID mask wearing, using the theory of planned behavior. What we would do is, the first thing we would ask is, what are the positive and negative things about mask wearing? Oh, well, I think I'm not sure what happened to my slide about elicitation interviews, but I think it's later on, but probably should have put it before this. So what theory of planned behavior says is that you should do these elicitation interviews in order to understand your population and what the relevant attitudes and normative, well, let's see, who are the important referent groups in your population. So I try to design these questions around that idea. So let's just try this. What are the positive and negative things about mask wearing, and how important are these things to you? So I'm going to make a list here, and I think I'm going to turn off my share and tell me, what are the positive and negative things about mask wearing?
Nobody can see if you have food
creative
stuck in
side,
your
you can
teeth.
make your own. It's a great chance to cosplay as a Mortal Kombat character.
Okay, wait, so a couple of people were talking at the same time. I know, Bryce, I know you said something. What did you say?
I said it's a great chance to be creative and set a style. You can dress as a Mortal Kombat character on a day-to-day basis. Don't always get to do that.
Okay, so and we see that, I think, that people are trying to sort of beef up their style sometimes with the mask that they choose.
Yeah, well, have fun with it.
Yeah, so it can be fun. What else?
Brian said something.
So I said that no one can see if you have food stuck in your teeth.
Oh, okay. So,
But you can avoid that awkward interaction of telling someone that they have food stuck in their teeth. But in terms of preventing the spread of COVID, that's another great reason. It kind of reduces the risk of transmission. I guess that's maybe the best positive.
So that would be reduce the spread. Wait, I gotta write this. Reduce the spread of COVID. So what we've got here is we've got some things that are about the health outcome, which is reduce the spread of COVID, and then we've got some things that are the more immediate things about the behavior. Like, oh, I can look stylish, and I can, maybe I've got a blemish on my face or food in my teeth. No one's going to see that. So we've got sort of both levels are going to potentially be important in predicting whether somebody's going to want to do it. Now, somebody else, I think, Cecilia, you were trying to say something.
Oh, I've just been kind of frustrated that I can't really wear lipstick during this time because of masks. I know that seems so small, but sometimes you have great makeup and you just want to wear some lipstick, and then you're going outside and it just doesn't make any sense to wear lipstick if you're going to wear a mask the whole time.
Okay, so that's, so we've got both positive and negative things that are going to come with mask wearing. So So are anybody well, you add either positive or negative things.
I have one negative thing I wanted to add.
Mhm.
This is something I personally experience all the time. I feel like it kind of excludes those who have like breathing problem or asthma. I have asthma, so this is something I struggle with a lot. So like when I'm traveling long distance, I need to wear my mask the whole time. So, when I was traveling from Germany back to United States, I had to wear it for more than like in 10 hours to just get to Texas and then from there to wear it again. That's a lot to take in when you already have like breathing problem, and it's like I feel like they should have some what do you call it situations where some individuals, or they should have different solution for those individuals who have breathing problem, like I stated myself.
I'm a fan of face shields
That kind of
for that because you get the whole plastic thing.
Yeah, and it's hard to go outside because that kind of worries me. Like, okay, if I want to go outside, I need to wear a mask. So I'm not wearing mask. I'm not going outside. So like, what are my options?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard that expressed as a major reason people don't want to. Bryce.
Sorry. She kind of reminds me of like travel in general. I saw somebody else might have seen it. I think it was this week. A group of Jewish passengers on a plane were told to get off the plane because they had an 18-month-old baby that would not, it kept pulling it off and, didn't want to wear it. And it's like, well, it's a baby. What are you going to do with that? But they're like, well, the baby has to have a mask. And it's like, how do you want to do that? It's hard enough to get a baby to wear their shoes some days. So that's kind of a bad thing.
I thought that kids under 2 were exempted, but no. Okay.
Apparently not on that flight. I don't know if there was some other situation, but the news report that I read, it was an infant and they were forced to get off.
Okay. Any other things that come to mind for positive and negative things about mask wearing?
Well, I think that
I have a negative.
Sorry, wait. Maggie, I think you go.
I think Tahani brings up a good point in terms of just like general population that struggles with either medical issues or disabilities. I'm hard of hearing, and wearing a mask with hearing aids and getting like an echo sometimes when you have the sound bounced back on you, or when they rub, like there's a lot going on behind your ears when you have hearing aids and a mask on. And I think, and also not being able to read lips. It's really difficult that there aren't more options for masks for people who are hard of hearing and for people who struggle with any sort of like disability, that you can get by when you don't have a mask on. And then when you do have a mask on, I have to wear my hearing aids so much more, and it's just hard.
Thanks. And someone else, I think someone else was trying to talk.
Yeah, it was me.
Oh, Mackenzie.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna also agree with what Maggie just said about reading lips and just kind of to her talking about her struggles. Like, I work in a coffee shop, and I actually had some people come in who were completely deaf. I'm not sure if both of them were or just one of them was, but it was really hard to communicate with them, because I can't read my lips. And so they kind of like motioned that, that they couldn't, that they were deaf. And I saw them like sign languaging to each other. So yeah, just kind of echoing that point, that's like definitely a negative. But also I was going to say not being able to see people's facial expressions. Like when I'm working in the coffee shop, I like joke around with people, or they say something and smile, and you can't like see those things. So that's like a negative. And I find it interesting / like funny when people come up to me and talk, and anytime they're talking, they pull their face mask down so that you can either hear them or that you can see their facial expression or whatever it is. And it's like, that's obviously completely opposite of the point. But it kind of highlights that problem of not being able to communicate well with the mask on, and that's a big
Mhm.
negative.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, like when we've considered, can we go back to class, in-person classes? We could, I mean, there are colleges and, there are universities that are meeting in person, and, but we need to be distanced. And if we're all wearing masks, are we better off or worse off than we are here on Zoom? Because at least I can see all your faces. And if you all had masks on, it'd be harder for me to see, if what's going on in your head. Okay, so anybody else want to throw anything else into this?
I want to add a positive that it's something that I can do as an individual to feel like I'm having an impact on the containment of the virus.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. It's a respectful action to those around you.
Okay.
And there's something about like having something that I can do as an individual in a situation which feels pretty out of control.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now what we would do, and I'm gonna not have us, I think, actually do it, is we would go through with the theory of planned behavior. We'd go through and we'd sort of say, well, how important is let's see. We have this list of positive and negative things. How important is each of those? And some of them would probably turn out to be more important than others. Like, so for example, being able to breathe if you have asthma is more important than the fun of having a mask that's got some kind of emblem on it that you want to display to the world. Or reducing the spread of COVID is probably, well, I guess, that depends on if you believe it, because some people don't believe that the masks reduce the spread. But if you believe it, then maybe that's more important to you than the fact that you can't wear lipstick. Sorry, Cecilia, no offense. But we would go through and we would have people both tell us what are the positive and negative things, but also how important are each of those positive and negative things. And from that, we could measure what the attitudes are about COVID. And then I'm just going to go back to my slide here, I think. And for lack of time, I think I won't. Then the next thing we would do is we would say, well, who are the important people in your life and what do they think about you wearing a mask? So actually, let's just do that for a second. So if I ask you that question, who's important in your life in your decision about whether or not you would wear a mask? Or it could be nobody. Nobody's important. It's just, like Julie said, it's an individual thing that I can do, and I want to do it because I can make that decision. Are there people around you who, if they saw you without a mask, they would be horrified? Or they would tease you because you had a mask on?
I would say the people in my life who are at higher risk of having severe complications with COVID or catching COVID care more about me wearing a mask. And then also the people in my life who work in the medical profession or the public health profession.
And do you have people on the other side, Melissa, who don't care or even are against it?
No.
Okay.
No.
Does anybody, I'm curious if anybody has, I mean, I've certainly seen or actually heard stories. I don't go out. So, actually, no, I'm sorry. I go skiing every weekend, and usually every weekend I confront somebody who's not wearing a mask. And sometimes they actually pretend like they don't speak English. And I know they do because they were just talking to somebody in English. So anyway, the process here would be, we would, in a particular population that if we're trying to encourage mask wearing, we would find out, well, what are the people around you? What are their opinions? And do you care about their opinions? Do you want to, like in Melissa's case, do you want to, well, the theory would say comply. Do you want to comply with those people that you know want you to wear a mask because they're health professionals or they're at high risk for complications? Or do you not really care what they think? So, you know, and you could go either way on that. You might care what they think, or you might not care what they think. And we would measure that, and we would use that to predict behavior. Yes, Bryce.
I do still have a handful of friends in Texas, and you know they're in the more rural townships and whatnot. And they post pictures and videos going to church, going to Walmart, and nobody wears one in that area. You can just, and that was not just recently because they rescinded the order, but throughout the whole COVID thing, they just didn't do it. But it was a community behavior, not just individual ones.
Yeah, so there's a community norm, or well, it sounds like there's a real norm, which we can measure it, right? Because we can walk down the street and count how many people are wearing masks. We can measure the actual norm of what people are doing, but then there's also a perception of what people are doing. So, and both are going to be important, and they're going to be related to each other probably.
I just have a quick question about measuring this. When you're conducting a study, let's say about mask wearing, do you have to account for like different geographical locations and maybe all of those different communities? Like I'm sure a community in rural Texas will have a different attitude towards it than like a group of hipsters in Brooklyn or like people in Seattle. I'm just wondering if you're trying to conduct like a nationwide study, do you have to account for those things?
Yeah, so the theory says that you need to do it within a population. So if we want to do a national study, which people do, we would want to make sure we're representing the range of attitudes and perceived norms across, wait, I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat. So wait, somebody read it out loud. It disappeared from my screen.
Love how you came up with those total opposites, LOL at hipsters.
So hipsters versus what was the opposite? Is people in
rural Texas.
Rural Texas versus hipsters. So what you would want to do, Brian, is you'd want to represent the types of attitudes that cover, all those opposites and everywhere in between, as well as the referent groups. So you'd want to know, for the hipster, their referent groups are probably different than the people in Texas. So you'd want to make sure your survey is assessing all of those. And then if you do your analysis on people from across the country, you're going to kind of end up with an average of all those things, which might not be very helpful because, if we're going to go to Texas and intervene with the people in Texas, what we really need to know is what do they think about this stuff? And if we're going to intervene with the hipsters, we have to know them. So if we get this average, this countrywide average, it may not be very, very useful.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. Let me share this again. And I think, so the final piece, so we talk about the attitudes, the important people in your life, and then also, the control aspects would be, can you get a mask? Can you get a mask that's, well, comfort would really be one of the attitudes, but, it would really be access to a mask. And in the case of mask wearing, I think now access is pretty easy. It wasn't last March. So, that's what that third, the control component would be. And I think I'm gonna, we talked about elicitation. I do want to point out that this model assumes that people are rational, that we actually are sort of doing these mathematical formulas in our head. I mean, and that's determining our behavior. So it's very, the way when it's fully applied, it's a very mathematical formula to predict behavior. Another important thing is this third bullet, that the beliefs determine the behavior regardless of whether they're rational, logical, or correct. So we could be wrong in our belief, but it's the belief that's gonna predict it, not the correctness of the belief. And that's I think, a good example of that is in the norms. Our perception of the norms could be very different, or could be very wrong. Could be that we think, it's hard to do it with masks because you can see it, but with vaping behavior, for example, we could think all the kids in my school vape. I'm the only one who doesn't vape, when in fact, really only 10 or 20% of the kids vape. It's just that I believe that more kids vape. So those beliefs are gonna predict our behavior, even if they're wrong. I think the integrated behavioral model, it just brought in a whole bunch of other things from other models. I think there's the model again. Okay, so I'm gonna stop my share here. And I think since it is 10:30 almost, let's take a break now. And when we come back, we will do the student-led discussion on theory of planned behavior. Sound good? Okay, so let's just, to make it simple, come back at 10:40, 13-minute break. Okay, 10:40. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, so let's see. Do we have the people who are leading today? Yeah, it's Natalie and Amelia, right? Okay, good.
Yes. Yeah, so we were going to do our presentation on the theory of planned behavior. I posted our handout in the student discussion page for your reference if you'd like to take a look at that before we present, or just after class if you'd like. But yeah, I guess we're gonna transition over to the presentation.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, actually, Amelia, would you mind sharing? Because for some reason my Zoom won't let me. Apologies.
Is it possible? Hopefully I don't have some setting that's keeping you guys from being able to share. Let me know if you can't, Amelia.
No, I think it's my, yeah, I haven't updated my Zoom or something like that.
Oh, there we go. That's pretty. Where is that? Do you know? Oh, you're muted.
Amelia, you're on mute.
Oh, oops, sorry. Let me see. Okay, let's stop this share. And then go share screen. What about this? Can you see that?
Nope, you're not sharing right now. Oh, now you are.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Okay. Okay, so hello, my name is Natalie, and obviously that is Amelia, and we are going to lead the student-led discussion about the theory of planned behavior and its application in the article by Brian Thoma and David Huebner. Next slide, please.
Yes.
Okay, so first, just to give you a little bit of background, we've obviously been over this with Lori's talk earlier today, but and there's also more information in the handout on the discussion board, but the theory of planned behavior originates from the theory of reasoned action, which was created by Martin Fishbane and Izhek Ajin, not how you pronounce it, but that was in 1975. And then the general idea of that theory was that attitudes toward a particular behavior is a better predictor of the behavior itself than the attitudes toward the result of that behavior. So like we talked about earlier, heart disease and eating healthy, things like that. And then we'll of course use our paper as an example of this as well. The theory of planned behavior differs from that theory in that they added perceived control over a behavior in 1985, which helps to account for situations where an individual may not feel that they have complete control over their behavior. Okay, so now we'll apply this to the article, which used the theory of planned behavior framework to examine how perceptions of parent-adolescent communication about condom use affects the frequency of condomless anal intercourse, or CAI, among young men who have sex with men, or YMSM. The population of interest is YMSM in the age range of 14 to 18 years old in the United States. Those young men who have sex with men ages 13 through 24, so a slightly larger window, are among the most at risk for HIV infections. And male-to-male sexual contact accounts for 93% of new HIV infections every year. And additionally, Black or African-American YMSM are at a particular risk for HIV infection. So the study participants were recruited via advertisements on Facebook. The advertisements were aimed toward young men who had mentions on their profiles of keywords like LGBTQ, gay pride, etc. And then 225 responses were used after the entries were filtered. The study aimed to measure the perceptions of parent-adolescent communication about condom use among this high-risk population. So that measurement, if we move to the next slide, included at the far left, included frequency and specificity of the communication, quality of the communication, and negative emotionality of that communication. And participants were asked questions to kind of figure out what that means. Like, how often do you and your parent discuss condom use? How honest is your parent when talking about condom use? How upset is your parent when talking about condom use? To determine the significance of each facet of that communication. So the graphic here shows the solid black arrows where there is a significant path from one factor to the next. As you can see, first and foremost, father-adolescent communication had an insignificant effect on all other factors leading to CAI. The study also generally showed that frequent, specific, high quality, low negative emotional mother-adolescent communication was associated with positive attitudes about condoms, higher subjective norms, higher perceived behavioral control, which in turn associated with less CAI. One important thing to note is that mother-adolescent communication also had a potentially negative indirect effect on CAI if there was high negative emotionality. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy there that it can be positive, but it can also be negative if the communication is very frequent, very, all that stuff, except it's maybe emotional or negative. And so that's kind of the general gist of the paper very quickly. Does anyone have any questions before we kind of move into our discussion questions? That's kind of where we wanted to talk some stuff through about the paper.
I thought that I read something about how the negative emotionality could either lead to less condom use or more condom use, and that was kind of confusing, that it had two indirect pathways, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very interesting, I think one of the discussion questions has kind of digs into this topic, but it's just kind of an interesting situation. Like you could be quote unquote doing everything right, but the negative emotionality of a parent communicating to their child may result in the opposite effect. Okay, so if maybe we stop sharing the screen and we'll do the same thing that the last group did, which is just type in the discussion questions. So I'll grab those. So our first one is, how do you think the recruitment process for the study affected / biased, if you think that it was biased, the results?
And just as a refresher, the study was aimed through Facebook advertisements for young men who frequently like posted keywords like LGBTQ, gay pride, etc. So what do you guys think?
I would say, obviously, if they're not out yet, then they're not going to be posting those things. So that's probably a significant community that was missed.
Yeah, and the paper did, I think, adjust for whether someone was out to their parents or not. But of course, the communication would be pretty different, maybe if you were out versus not.
Did the study, excuse me, did it mention excluding people that they initially found but turned out to just be heterosexual supporters? Because like there's a lot of straight men that be like, gay pride, you know.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely they filtered through the responses. I think a lot of their filtering was like maybe more quote unquote joke type of responses, or maybe trying to win the $50 gift card or something like that. So I'm not sure how many people they found that were kind of just like allies, for instance, but that's a good question.
So I'm not a young person, and I don't use Facebook, but I hear that the kids these days aren't using Facebook anymore. So I wonder if they, missed out on a substantial portion of people that only use Instagram or Snapchat or whatever the platforms are these days that the kids are using.
Well, and one of my thoughts was as well, like Facebook would be the one place where your parents would see that you have keywords like LGBTQ, gay pride. If you were not out to your parents, that would be the one place you would not add those keywords, probably.
I think also that individuals who might be more prone to being really active in a social media community within the LGBTQ community may not have the best social supports from their family members, and they seek that out elsewhere. And so that already, has an inherent bias against communication with their parents, that they're not going to listen to a lot of things that they're saying because typically you can find community with people who accept and support you on social media when you can't find that in home. And just because you're out to your parents and maybe you're still living with them doesn't mean that you're in a socially supportive situation. So I didn't see that they compensated for those questions as well.
I don't know. I think that, sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
Okay. Maggie, I think that they did in a sense, because they mentioned that the survey takers could identify who, like what position within their life their parent was, and it wasn't always their parent. Well, it didn't have to be their parent. They had a lot of different options, but like 98% of the people that responded did say some form of parent, like either biological mother, adopted mother, stepmother, or something like that, which is why they called them parents in the study. But that there was an initial option that it could be somebody of it just had to be somebody of a different generation than you, that was giving you advice in that kind of a format. So I can see where that might have offered the opportunity for them to be older people in the same community.
I guess just I get partly because you can have those individuals who are those parental figures and still not have that equitable, like, open communication dialogue. And I think that's more what I was getting at, because you're right. I think that was a great point in the study. But I think my perspective is a little biased too, having been a part of this, like, process and community. So.
Mark, did you have a comment on it?
Yeah, I mean, it was just maybe to I don't know, counter or provide another view or my perspective from what Maggie had said, and would just be, I guess, if you're on the other side, if you're comfortable enough, like posting on Facebook, maybe you do have some degree of support. So, I think in the end, whether there's limitations or not with, just using Facebook or not, it's a pretty big sample. And so to me, like, even though there are going to always be limitations in who they're recruiting, it's, that large of a sample, carries generalizability and power with it. So I thought that was a positive.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what year this article was published, but I've just been wondering what kind of recruitment process would be the most effective now in 2021 if we were to think in more in like pandemic times during these studies, like what would be the most effective?
I think they published this in 2018, though I don't know when the study was conducted. I don't think that was clear. But I don't know, I don't think there's been too much change between, I guess, like 2018 and 2021 on the use of social media within the lower group. Like it's been, a younger age group. It's been pretty high since it was created. So, but I think Michelle was right that maybe Facebook wouldn't be the place to do that today. So I don't know, maybe Instagram. I don't know what people are
or
using.
maybe it's TikTok. I don't, and I think you can advertise on TikTok. I keep meaning to join TikTok and see what it looks like, but I haven't.
One of the social media platforms that my cousin, who's a member of the LGBTQ community, uses is Tumblr. I hear that that's a pretty popular posting platform.
I was just going to say that definitely with Gen Z, Facebook is going to be obsolete at this point. But you're right, Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, all of those, you're going to find those different communities. So that's kind of what that would look like now, and like going beyond just one platform, looking at the different social media platforms.
I think it's like Twitter, because like whenever I go, like some people put like the bright flag and stuff, and then when I go into their account, it's anonymous accounts. So like some people are like, maybe they're not out yet, so they just create these anonymous accounts and just be themselves. So I think Twitter is like a good place to look into this.
I wonder if you could even advertise through dating apps in that sense, like Grindr maybe. Do they offer any opportunities for that? And then I always wonder at like going through all of this process and connecting to all of these young men who have sex with men, and it's all about condom use. Do you think that they then provided information at the end of the survey on condom use? Because like, are you really helping a community if you just study it without providing it like the good information that might be missing?
I mean, I didn't see any mention of them, adding to the education
But that's a really good point.
Well, at the same time, though, how many public health, this is kind of a survey-based thing. How many public health studies like that actually do that at the end of the study where they're like, oh, well, thanks for participating. Here's a educational, pamphlet or whatever.
Yeah, I've done it before. So sometimes, it's especially easy in an electronic survey because you get to the end and you can kind of withhold. You want people to answer the survey based on what they currently think. So you don't want to give them the information before they do the survey, but it's so easy with an electronic survey. Once they get to the last question, you can offer them the information. You can send them to a link. You have a lot of potential. And I've done it a few times with surveys where at the end we provide that, especially surveys that are asking, I don't think this one was so much asking sort of knowledge-based questions, but I've done surveys with physicians where we're asking them a bunch of knowledge-based questions, and it's gonna stimulate that desire to know the right answer, I think. So we, at the end, have a link to get so that they can see what the right answers are for the questions.
I sit corrected.
Well, I don't think everybody does it, Bryce. I think it's a good point that you have that opportunity. Why not provide the information?
Yeah, it's like, what good are you actually doing this study and then publishing it for the academic world if the results don't necessarily directly trickle back or directly help the community that you're studying?
Well, I think it's interesting point. What isn't the point of this? A lot of this research is you're trying to get at the behavior about why, some of these, how you can get this information across. You sort of know, right, that just providing the information isn't going to create the behavior change. So at some level, I think you can argue, that sure, you could provide the information, but that's not what's going to change behavior. So you're trying to develop you're trying to figure out what behaviors would be the target of your intervention. So kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, sorry, that is a good point. I completely overlooked the fact that it's a behavior change.
Yeah, well, and I think this study seemed to me like it provides some really useful information for developing interventions, because you can it looks like mothers are the important people, at least within the context of what they asked about. And then you could potentially have training programs for mothers about how to, not use negative or hold back negative emotion and, sort of effectively communicate.
I just wanted to add one thing that one of my teachers back from high school, like he started a program where, he was educating pretty much all students. I went to South High, so so he was educating everybody on, accepting our differences and not having much bias and just respecting the boundaries of each other as well. And if you heard of South High School, it's pretty diverse and everyone is different than the other. I'm not sure if that's a reason why everybody kind of accepted the idea of, respecting each other boundaries and the idea of being different from each other. But I feel like sometimes it comes down to what the community is doing with this information that, research studies comes up with. It's not just like, okay, we did a research and these are the results and this is our limitation and whatnot, but also what are we doing as individuals to kind of better our community and educate them on any type of issues or not issue, but like things that our community might not have enough knowledge on, how to interact with those people who are different than them, and ways to kind of help them, because it's a lot of stress on, when you're not able to come out, that's a lot of stress to take in. So feeling the sense of belonging, it's something that I feel like as a community we should come together to. But
yeah, that's a great point. And it's just interesting to see that the community that I was raised in, you know, just living in the suburbs of Denver, we were only ever taught about safe sex in a heterosexual relationship. It was never, you know, kind of isolated and educated children of, you know, just like one specific subset, but nothing else outside of that. So I think it's, you know, it's very important for communities to look at that and not have this heterosexual bias and only teach and educate these children about one certain way to be healthy. So yeah, I think that's a really great point.
I do think it's also important to point out here when we talk about these sensitive subjects like mental health or LGBTQ or things like that, perceived norms tend to be on the extremes. And so if we're asking these kiddos, you know, or however old teens, about their perceptions of their family's response to them, that can be very skewed for a lot of different reasons that we've talked about, right? So is my school also supportive? Like if they have no support whatsoever and they have this one parent, right, that's possibly supportive, the rest of it can, you know, maybe muddy what the parent is trying to do or something like that. So I wonder if there was any control for that in this study as well.
That's a great question. I'm not sure if they did have control. I mean, they used quite a few questions about, I think specifically, obviously, parent-adolescent communication, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure how much you can kind of like tease that out if the kid has, or if the teen has just beliefs based on his or her surroundings. Let's move on to the next question if no one else has any final thoughts.
Can I just make a comment? I'm not even sure if it's appropriate to say something happened in this conversation that like there was good something happened that I just feel like I just want to name when Maggie was talking and providing perspective about the study design. And then she said, I have a bias from my own experience. And I don't know if that's a bias or an expertise. Bias didn't feel quite the right word, and feels important as public health professionals, like in this group, to be able to hear expertise when it's coming, when it's in the conversation.
Thanks for bringing that up, Julie, because I think I agree, Maggie. I think that is more of expertise than bias. I think I agree with that. Which is a good thing.
Thanks.
At a minimum, it's an extremely valuable perspective.
Yes.
Okay, so
There was just something about making room for it that felt important to me.
Absolutely. So we talked about kind of how the mother-adolescent communication is really the only significant communication among the two, mother versus father. So the next question kind of talks about how do we bring the father into the communication if there is when there is a father around or when there is a mother around, how do we bring both of them into the conversation and not just have the mother adolescent communication be the only thing that affects CAI?
I guess I would have to wonder if there's any value in that, considering that the study showed that there's really no effect of the father's perspective. Like, might it be more logical to just target intervention towards moms? Maybe I misunderstood the question. I don't know.
Yeah, no, at the end of the thing, at the end of the article, it did say that there'd be no harm, or how'd they word it? I'm right there. Sorry. While father communication was unassociated with condom use intentions and CAI in the current study, no negative paternal associations were identified, and future interventions can only benefit from including all parents. But just because they didn't identify, like there wasn't a significant connection between fathers and positive outcome, but how do they know that there wouldn't have been a significant connection between fathers and a negative outcome? But they connected, or I think that they said that this is maybe the one situation where these studies relate to heterosexual studies in condom use, and that like fathers just generally are pretty just don't generally communicate about sex with their children. And so I don't know, that's I ran out of thought there, sorry.
Yeah, I think the aim of this question is just like, obviously there's room for improvement. If there's, just no significance whatsoever in their communication, there's definitely room, because of course we want to bring in as much, expertise or as many important people in their life to have sort of a positive effect as possible.
Because there are a lot of, families that may not have a mother, or they're searching for that mother figure, or maybe just have their father, and trying to coach fathers into kind of breaking down those social norms, or what their perceived norms that fathers shouldn't be open about sex with their son. I think it's really important to bring both parental figures or guardians to the table, and figure out a good strategy.
I was really shocked by this. It seemed crazy to me that fathers had no impact. Like, because I think actually historically there's a lot of moms who leave it to the dads to communicate about sex with their sons. And so it was kind of scary to me to see this finding that there's like no impact of those conversations.
I wonder if it's different with sons who are heterosexual.
Michelle, I was gonna
kind of
ask
a question. You or me?
Go ahead, Bryce.
Okay. Something I wanted to kind of ask, when we're bringing up fathers with heterosexual sons, what about sons with homosexual fathers? Like if you had a boy that is with the same-sex couple parents, I imagine the conversation would be different because they may have experienced it and, be more open with a homosexual son than, a heterosexual father might. So that was just something I kind of wanted to ask or point out.
Sorry, you can go ahead.
Okay, I'll go real quick. I was gonna say just like kind of Bryce, you're starting to get at the why, and we think 2018 for publishing a study isn't that long ago. It was 3 years ago, so kind of these changes come with social change of having more parents who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, breaking down heteronormative family structures, moms going away from just being the default parent. All of that social change is also going to change how that family structure is, how families relate, and how those discussions happen.
I was thinking about when it comes to the LGBTQ community, especially kids, I don't think they discuss that with their parents, but they get their perceived norms from their community. And so when they see many people that don't use condoms, for example, they would think that this is the norm and they should follow that. I just have this thought. I think they get it from their community, especially if their family are heterosexual. Yeah, and like, and if the person or the individuals are young, I don't think they will discuss that with their parents. Yeah, I just want to add that.
Kind of going off what Mustafa said, is that like also a lot of sex education and stuff is targeted for condoms are used to prevent pregnancy. Well, if pregnancy isn't possible, then it's kind of, you don't need it. So that's just a thought about that.
I think there's also an education aspect, especially with homosexual sex. Just personal story, when I came out to family members, they didn't know that STDs could be transmitted between homosexual couples. And so it was going to my closest confidants, my support, which thankfully I was supported in my coming out as well. And it was a conversation of, you know, this is who I am, but there was no education that my family was able to provide me for that, in addition to the education system. And so it was a hard thing as a teen to be like, okay, well, nobody knows about this, but this is what I'm feeling type situation. And I imagine that in this, with like the perceived norms, it all gets tied in together. So definitely an education thing on the parents' front, which I think, Jenna, you hit the nail right on the head, is we're seeing that change happen, like social change. And I think that will help a lot of the younger generations be able to, you know, not have to, fortunately, deal with what older generations had to. So
I think going back to the question of like, how could we target this lack of communication between fathers and adolescents? And we brought this up, is that like mothers kind of take on that gender role of discussing sex, at least with daughters. I don't have any personal experience of mothers to sons. But and TV leads us to think that men talk to their sons about sex, but maybe that's not true if there appears to be no connection from this study. But it's just, I keep losing my train of thought. But I think we'd have to put more effort into changing larger gender roles around between male and female heads of households to actually make somewhat more of a connection between father and adolescents in regards to sex and condom discussions.
Okay, so moving into kind of the more, well, this sort of applies to both mother and father communication, but Michelle, like you were saying, kind of like, what's the next step here? Particularly with the negative emotional communication, how as public health professionals do we kind of mitigate that as much as possible?
I kind of wonder if a lot of the negative aspects of the communication are coming out of fear. And as a parent, I can tell you that when my kid's about to do something that's I consider dangerous, like running across the yard towards the street even, I don't go into like my calm centered voice. I go into, stop it! Like I go into this crazy place where what I would call mama bear instincts kick in, and I want to protect my child. And I kind of wonder if there's fear in the base of some of these communications. And so kind of going back to education and teaching parents how to communicate about this and to not be afraid and to feel empowered, I imagine would make a difference.
In a lot of sex education, I think it's kind of like that meme of the two Spider-Men pointing at each other, but you have like the school pointing at the parents saying, you should talk about it. And then the parents pointing at the school saying, you should talk about it. So I feel like breaking down those barriers and figuring out what things need to be covered in a kind of statewide or a nationwide curriculum, and what things can be talked about at the home, and to kind of echo what we've been talking about in terms of communication, just removing, those awkward, uncomfortable, and maybe fear-based things in parents, and I'm sure, you know, maybe the children aren't super psyched to have their parents talking to them about this stuff. My dad was a pharmacist, and so I had a very he was very open with that sort of communication, but I think that's a really important aspect to hone in on is kind of breaking down those uncomfortable and awkward feelings with the parents.
I think like usually young people first time experiencing like the idea of like having sex through porn. So I think like porn stars have also like an impact on the education. Like if they see them that they don't use condoms, for example, they would think that this is the normal. And I think that's like how young people discover these like the sex education or like their first experience with like having sex, like they will just watch porn. I just want to say that.
No, that's a really good
That's a
point.
legit thing. There's a lot of interviews with porn stars. You can find them on YouTube. One of them, she just did it kind of as a PSA that they were, you know, put out the statistics for what age kids start to watch porn and how many of them are doing it. And they're like, yes, your child. We don't want to be the sex educator for your child. Please have the talk. And they'll encourage people to do that a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Mustafa, because we, in theory of planned behavior, we're talking about who are the referent groups, who do you look to for, who do you care about that what you're doing matches the norm. And so if the referent group is, you know, through pornography, then we as public health professionals would want to intervene. And I think, Bryce, what you just said sounds like an example of that, where you porn star giving a message about safety. Is that what it was?
Not just about safety, but about kids using porn as like they're getting their sex educate. Basically, what Mustafa was saying, that kids are getting sex education from porn, which is not a good source. And, you know, the porn stars were kind of coming out and saying, we're not sex educators. We're not a good source because this isn't real. This is a fantasy. And your child shouldn't be getting that education from us.
So I think there's two potential, I guess, points of intervention. One is to try to restrict kids from having access to porn, but knowing that they're going to work their way around that, I think.
With the digital age being what it is, good luck.
Yeah, but you can also use that. I mean, I've forever thought that we should be using popular media more for health education. And, you know, maybe we would shy away from using porn stars, but maybe that's really what, you know, maybe that's what needs to happen. If that is, you know, at least a segment of the youth population is getting their information through that avenue.
There have been public health interventions actually associated with social cognitive theory, which we're going to talk about next, where in Latin America, where telenovelas are really popular, they use that medium to give like public health advice. So they have characters on the show, you know, have like storylines or have a conflict or problems that like the characters themselves become educated. And then those characters model healthy behavior, which then the viewer is educated. And then also, since those are people that they look up to, are likely to then imitate that behavior.
And I have one more thing to say that I wonder, it might be a little bit of a non sequitur, but I kind of wonder to what degree these kinds of conversations in parents, it's kind of going back to the fear thing, I think, brings up their own sexuality, because I don't think you can have a conversation with your child about your child's sexual behavior without acknowledging that you're a human yourself and that you have a sexual like part of who you are. And these are not things that we're really good at talking about, you know, even with our partners, let alone with our children. It just makes the parent feel super vulnerable, I think. So I think, again, coming back to like maybe even some stigma around sex is something that could be targeted to make these conversations go a little bit better.
No, that was exactly the point I was going to bring up, Michelle, is sex itself cannot be talked about in a very like open setting, whether it's in your family, whether even, you know, we're all public health professionals here, but I feel maybe some of us are having these little like itches when we talk about these things. And that's because it's not socially acceptable to really, even though we're inundated by it, right? By social media and everything, we can't somehow reduce that stigma. And so I think that would probably be the overall first step that at least I would take when we talk about planned behavior is getting at that underlying problem and then tacking the levels on top of it to try to make change. But great point, Michelle.
Just going back to what Michelle was just saying, I think sometimes it comes to the fear of, what if I talk to my kiddo or my child about this, then they're more likely to go and like practice it and see it for themselves. So I think that also sometimes brings a lot of fears, but I feel like with everything that's happening right now, I feel like parents are less likely wanting their kids to, you know, get pregnant when they're like, I don't know, 15 years old or 16 years old, and like seeing their world destroyed. That's how possibly they're thinking about it. But again, I lost my train of thought, but one of my classes that I took last semester, we talked about like how parents or caregivers are able to have control over whether their kids get sex education on education in school. And then like if you're not letting them get sex education in school and you're not talking to them about it, so where are they getting their information? Are they just going with what they're thinking and doing it for themselves to see what it looks like, or someone else is educating them but not giving them the right education? But I feel like it also differ when we look at it from cultures. So some of the things that I'm hearing today, I'm trying to like kind of take it in and like think about it, because in my culture we don't do that, or we don't talk about it. I got married a year ago. Until today, my mom and my dad and no one in my family ever talked to me about sex. So like so like there's things that yeah, I think I'll stop here.
We have realized that we are a minute over and haven't done our Kahoot, but
we don't need to do the Kahoot.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everyone's participation. I think that you all brought a lot of really good points to the table, and I'm really glad that we were able to take this time to discuss. Are there any other final comments or questions? Or I just really appreciate your participation. And is this a Cecilia? Is this a what is this website?
It's a fact sheet on where most American teens get their sex education information from.
That's great.
So you can look through that if you're interested.
Great, thank you for sending that.
So that was a great discussion. Sorry we didn't get to your Kahoot, but I think
it's okay.
The next group has one, so we'll have one. So I think let's do. How about if we do a 8-minute break till, what would that be? 11:35, and then I will just try to make like maybe 5 minutes of comments about social cognitive theory, or well, I probably won't keep it to 5 minutes, but we'll make sure that you guys have 45. Well, let's see, if you're going to have 45, I'll do the math. I'll do the math and make sure you have your 45 minutes. And we're not going to have time for small groups related to your health behavior changes today. Okay, so I'll see you at 11:35.
Hey, Mark, what's the Zoom situation?
It's not looking good. I'm on my phone now. It's working well. So my computer's updating. So hopefully that will help, but it's actually almost done now. So hopefully I'll have it up in minutes.
Well, I can always like share my screen with the PowerPoint.
Yeah, but I have the quiz, which is my logon. So but we can, maybe as a backup, we have kind of the questions. We could just ask the questions, I guess.
Yeah.
And not do it.
Maybe you could put the like the information about the quiz, or do you remember that? Like the
Oh yeah, that's true.
We could put it in the chat, and then we just won't be able to see it on the shared screen, but people will be able to see it on their screen.
Well, hopefully this will work here in a minute. Yeah, I don't know what it is because my phone works fine. My internet speed is fine. The rest of my family is zooming just fine. So something.
Them all.
So you know what, you guys, I just did the math, and so if we come back at 11:35, that will be exactly 45 minutes, right? 20 plus 25 is 45. So how about can I use like 2 or 3 minutes to just give a quick overview of social cognitive theory, or I can also just say nothing. What's going to be most supportive of what you guys are doing?
We have like a little 5-minute intro to SCT, but you could definitely take a few minutes to kind of give your piece if you'd like. I think we can do without those 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, so maybe I'll just hit on what I think are the most important points about social cognitive theory to set the stage. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah. So Melissa, it just was like about to install, and then it said that it failed and canceled. So it's starting over. Kind of fun.
All right, I'm gonna run and take the puppy out, but I'll be back in 4 minutes. I'll
Better
plan
news.
to do the presentation for now.
but he has his own agenda today.
Okay, I don't see everybody back here, but I'm gonna get started because it'll just be you and me, Cecilia. Oh wait, Michelle's here. No, others are here. Because we're tight on time here, so I'm gonna just say I'm gonna spend like, I don't know, hopefully only like 2 minutes talking about social cognitive theory so that the student-led discussion can start. So Albert Bandura was the originator of social cognitive theory, and theory of planned behavior, I think, is a nice lead into social cognitive theory, because theory of planned behavior is really mostly about what's in your head, how you perceive what's going, what other people think, and what you think are the important outcomes of a behavior for you. Social cognitive theory pulls back in the actual environment around you. So it moves it's not just in that center of the socio-ecological model, it's now bringing in the environment around you. So it's a major component of it is this idea of reciprocal determinism, which is that what you think, your personal cognitive factors, so what's in your head is related to affects your behavior, but your behavior also affects what's in your head. And environment affects what you think and what you do, and your behavior also affects the environment, and your thought, what you think also influences the environment. So all these things are working together and all the time and influencing each other with this idea of reciprocal determinism. So a key factor is self-efficacy. Bandura is who came up with the idea of self-efficacy. It's central to social cognitive theory. And then it's been adopted by most of the other behavioral theories. So it was a great idea, and it's turned out that self-efficacy, which is what we think we can do. So do I think I can floss every day, or do I think I can eat healthy? It's what your confidence that you can do something is this really central thing to all behavior, and we can predict behavior really effectively with it. So if we know how confident you are in doing something, we can predict whether or not you're going to carry out that behavior. But it's also, self-efficacy is built through the first bullet here, previous mastery experiences. So what that means is if I've done something before, I have confidence I can do it again. And so it's this really very circular thing. Like if you can get somebody to try something and they can be successful, it's going to build their confidence and they're going to do it again. And what Bandura has shown and others have shown is that vicarious experience, which means watching other people do something and watching other people be successful, can build your own self-confidence. So it sets up this idea of role models, really people around us who are similar to us being successful or unsuccessful can change the confidence that we have for ourselves. And I think there's one other thing I wanted to point out. Let's see. Really important within social cognitive theory is self-regulation, which I didn't really use that word on this slide, but it's an idea that you monitor your behavior and you set goals and you get feedback. So you're sort of building, you're regulating your behavior, and that's also building confidence that you can do the behavior. And I think I'm gonna just stop there and just say this is what we're doing next week, and then I'm gonna turn it over to you guys. But so these two models next week, and just keep in mind in 2 weeks we have the book clubs. The only thing you need to do to prepare for that is to read your book. And everybody, as far as I can tell, has signed up for a book. So I think you're all set there, but just be sure you've got your time set aside to finish reading your book. And I'm going to stop there and turn it over to you guys.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Oops. And Mark, do you want to introduce the quiz?
Yeah, so I'm having a bit of a Zoom disaster, but I'm on my phone. And so how we wanted to start this was also kind of using a quizzing software. This one will be a little different. So I did put the URL and the PIN number in the chat, because ideally I would have shared my screen, but that's not going to happen with my phone. And so if you enter that URL on your phone or computer and the PIN, then the first sort of quiz should pop up, and it's just on the background of the theory. So can people get to that? And I think, Melissa, if you stop sharing your screen, maybe I can even I can show you. That's my screen share right now. So people plug that in, then should pop up a few questions.
Just take this now. That one.
Yeah, we can just start. We're just going to start with that. And that'll
It's
be one of
a self-paced quiz, just 4 questions long.
There we go. One person's in. So we got one person submitting. Don't worry too much. It's not this isn't going towards your grade. So there we go. So we got a few people going. 5 people. So yeah, it's just more of a jumping off point for some of the discussion and points we want to cover. There we go. Now we got 8. Let's see. Can you actually see this when I kind of flip my camera around?
Yeah.
Kind of, right? I mean, I guess maybe if you pin my picture here. So, okay, so let's go with that just in the interest of time. We got 11 people submitting. And we got a bunch of unregistered users, so we don't get the placements. Oh, there, Julie was brave enough to register.
So I think she gets first place.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we have this first one about the main factors that make up the social cognitive theory, and there you see them, and Melissa will go over these in a second. The personal cognitive factors, the behavioral factors, and the socio-environmental factors. That was the right answer. Reciprocal determinism is sort of the key principle that sort of guides social cognitive theory, and Melissa will also get into that here in a minute, and we have a lot of details about that in the handout. And then kind of like Lori was just mentioning, self-efficacy is kind of the one of the most widely used and applied constructs within this social cognitive theory, and we'll get into a little bit of that more within context of the article as well. Okay.
Awesome. So let me share my screen again. All right, well, that was your pop quiz. All right, so a little more about a longer intro into social cognitive theory and a little bit of history. So Albert Bandura is the father of SCT, and it actually originated from his social learning theory, which he developed after the Bobo doll study in 1961. So in this study, they had groups of children, and they were shown a video depicting a woman who was aggressively hitting and aggressively talking to a Bobo doll. And then after that, the children were given the chance to play with the same Bobo doll, and they began imitating the observed behavior from the video. So they were using similar language and aggressively hitting the doll. And the most important part of the design of this study is that the children were given no incentive to be aggressive. So this directly contradicted the long-held belief that all behavior was directed by reinforcement or rewards. So without incentive or encouragement to hurt the doll, the kids were actually modeling the behavior set before them. So the social learning theory was made up of 5 main concepts. One, reciprocal determinism, which is a dynamic model of causation between personal cognitive factors, socio-environmental influences, and personal behavior. So all these 3 factors interact with each other, influence each other, and determine each other. Although physical environment is considered in the model, it's mostly in the context of how your physical environment affects one's own cognitive status and function. So the second is behavioral capability, which Lori touched on, which is one's actual ability to perform the behavior. Then observational learning, which is when people observe a behavior and then imitate it. Next, reinforcement, which can be internal or external. And it determines the likelihood that someone will continue a certain behavior or stop a behavior or start it. And it can be positive or negative and be self-inflicted or inflicted by the environment. And then last for social learning theory is expectations, which is what one anticipates will happen, either a consequence or benefit to a person when they engage in that behavior. So it can be health related or non-health related. And they're mostly derived from previous exposure and are subjected to that specific individual. So Bandurrell updated this theory in the 80s and renamed it social cognitive theory. And the main concept or construct that he introduced was that of self-efficacy, which is a person's own confidence in being able to successfully perform a behavior. And it introduced how emotions, thoughts, and feelings affect a person's behavior. And it was at the time unique to SCT, but was then adopted into a lot of other theories and model, including the theory of planned behavior that we talked about earlier today. So that is a brief overview. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the specifics of social cognitive theories that relates to the article? No? Cool.
All right, great. So I can kind of take over, and I'm back on my computer, so hopefully it's looking better. Yeah, so now we're just going to talk a little bit more in context of the article. So you can go to the next slide, Melissa. So the article was, everyone got a chance to at least scan it over, I hope. Self-regulation, self-efficacy, outcome expectations and social support, social cognitive theory, nutrition, behavior. So just kind of remind everyone, and I know we're talking about a couple of different things today. This article, some of the background and purpose, the main sort of background statement was, how we know that poor diet influences a variety of health outcomes. The authors made an argument. I think this becomes a bit simplistic, the background they proposed. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the end about some alternative ways to look at this problem. But healthy foods are generally more accessible and affordable than they have been in the past. Yet, despite that, people's fruit and vegetable consumption is declining, and people are still consuming more and more fatty foods. And so, you know, with this sort of gap in like there's more access and it's cheaper, but people yet they're not adopting those healthy behaviors, and we know they lead to health problems. So there must be some behavioral component that's influencing this, and of course, these authors kind of applied this social cognitive theory in order to try to explain that. Okay, so what we wanted to do was another pop quiz kind of about the article. So actually, Melissa, I think I can share my screen now. So if you stop yours, we'll do another one. So it'll be the same. They'll actually be the same pin, so you should be able to kind of just log back onto that same website and put in that same pin, or it should, if you refresh, it should now be the second quiz. We'll just take a couple minutes. Again, this is just to kind of orient us and frame the discussion and highlight some of the main points. Okay, so maybe we'll just give it another few seconds here. We got about 8 people, 9 people, maybe we'll go to 10. All right, 11, perfect. So all our unregistered users placing here. In terms of the main components that this article proposed to measure, they actually did, kind of select constructs within the 3 main components of the social cognitive theory to measure. We'll go through those a little bit. And here were the main constructs that they measured. And yes, indeed, self-regulation ended up being sort of the strongest predictor of healthy food choice in this article. The overall model, the social cognitive theory model, explained the most variance specifically in fruit and vegetable purchase and intake. So we'll sort of talk about some of those details here. I guess I can share my screen for this now too. Okay. So again, here in terms of going back to this the overall model of social cognitive theory and the sort of general constructs that Melissa presented, again, this article tried to touch on all 3 areas. One thing Lori talked to Melissa and I about before this was just about how a lot of articles might use social cognitive theory, but don't necessarily apply all the constructs. So at least this article, kind of got to the 3 main areas, which we thought was important. In terms of the methods, just to orient us and remind us, this was a secondary analysis of a larger prospective analysis that was being done for a variety of other reasons. But it did enroll 712 adults, so quite a large sample from one region of one state. So, that potentially is a little bit limiting. And they had potentially about 2,500 people that they were looking to recruit. And, so they got whatever that is, about a quarter of those people. You can see here some of the demographics, the age, the percent female, percent African-American, And I just pulled out some other kind of, I thought, relevant descriptors in terms of, household income, since part of what they were measuring is what people actually bought and purchased in terms of food. So you can see the median income of 54,000, but about 10% of the people had relatively low incomes. Mean schooling was, post-secondary, but there's about 20% of people that were not high school graduates. And then this was also interesting. I thought, about 80% of the people were overweight, and almost half would be considered obese. So potentially maybe a more overweight and obese sample than like the general public. And then their primary outcomes were, in order to measure these social cognitive variables, this food belief survey. And then for nutrition behavior, what they used was a questionnaire that asked about intake, and then they gathered grocery store receipts to see what people were actually buying. And they collected these over, I can't remember if it was 3 weeks or 6 weeks, but over, it was a prospective collection. So specifically talking about how they measured and looking at the main outcome was this food data survey. And here they had, sounds like they had validated this and looked at the reliability in prior work. But these are the specific statistics related to the internal consistency of the measure in the 4 kind of different main social cognitive theory constructs that they were proposing to measure. And kind of like we've been learning, these Cronbach alpha numbers are all above 0.7, and most of them are actually quite high, above 0.8 and closer to 0.9. So we have relative confidence that this is probably a measure that's getting at these constructs appropriately. Okay, so that was good that they reported that, and they had a nice table that broke all that down. Okay, here's where things get fun. So this is the results figure, or with some of our highlights here, looks like maybe a piece of abstract art. So I'll try to walk through some of the main points of this. So this was a really complicated analysis that used structural equation modeling and latent class analysis. And all these arrows are all the different relationships, direct and indirect, that could occur between all the different variables that were measured. But let's try to highlight some of the important points. So as you can see highlighted here in this kind of purple star is one of the main or strongest results. And this is this idea that self-regulation was overall kind of the single best predictor of nutrition. So the more people reported the ability to self-regulate, the better their diet was. So the less fat and the more fruit, fiber, and vegetables they ate. And you can kind of see that with all these arrows. The most arrows kind of pointing in towards self-regulation, these numbers are the actual effects along with the statistical significance. Then looking at social support and self-efficacy, so these kind of 2 yellow boxes, those also were important predictors. So people with higher level of either of those, self-efficacy or family social support, also had better dietary intake and purchases. And then down in the red here, this was the kind of the final social cognitive theory construct that they measured, was outcome expectations. And actually, interestingly, positive outcome expectation, which we didn't highlight, had no effect on any of these food decisions, and really only negative outcome expectation had a negative effect on food purchases and food intake. So the extent, this was a little hard for me to wrap my head around, but it was the extent that people expected healthier food choices to detract from potentially other activities, or be somehow dissatisfying emotionally or physically, created then worse food choices. Okay, so those were kind of the social cognitive theory constructs. when we look at the results in the green boxes over here, we see that the amount of variance, so that's the statistic R squared, that was explained by the overall social cognitive theory in this study. So it explained quite a bit of variance, so 61% of the variance for choices in terms of fruits and vegetables. Also about 50% of the variance for fiber intake, and a little bit less, about 35% of the variance for fat purchases and intakes. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight some of these other characteristics. So in terms of socioeconomic status, the higher your socioeconomic status in this study, the more fiber and fruits and veggies that you ate. And also the older your age was, the better your diet choices were around fiber and fruit and veggies, but not fat. So that was not significant between age groups and socioeconomic status. And then gender, being male, maybe not surprisingly, myself identifying as male, was associated with all across the board worse diet. So fiber, fruit, veggies, and fat. So that's the article. I think maybe we'll have at least a few minutes to discuss some of these questions, and we don't have to talk about these questions. We're happy to kind of go wherever this discussion takes us, but I can post these in the chat and stop my screen share here. But I did want to maybe touch on, we've kind of been highlighting measurement and how we think, what we think about the ways they measured food consumption and even the social cognitive theory constructs, and then the generalizability of these findings. So maybe we can start there, but again, kind of see where this takes us.
Yeah, we wanted to touch on measurement because we both found it very interesting that in this study, the explanatory variables were all qualitative measurements. And then the outcome variables were quantitative measurements. And I don't know, I just found it interesting. So anyone have any comments about that, or maybe other thoughts you guys had about the way that the variables were measured in the study?
I think my biggest beef with this study was the receipts. I don't know if anybody else had the same feeling, but what you buy at a grocery store doesn't necessarily go into your body, your personal body, like if you're buying for your whole family, or maybe there's some dietary restrictions of a family member that you're purchasing for. But also, I don't know if anybody else has this issue of buying a crap ton of produce and then it goes bad. Or you're not able to get to it in the time that it needs to be eaten. And so I would wonder if they actually looked at the consumption of the food that was labeled on those receipts, if the situation would be different.
That's a really good point, because I guess you could probably argue that they're actually looking at the behavior of what foods you purchase, not necessarily behavior of consuming that food. So that's definitely a way that the results could kind of be skewed.
So quick question, did they associate what you purchased with your intention to eat it?
No, I don't think so. That's a great point. And so to follow up with Megan's point, that was my big thing is using the food receipts and knowing that you don't just buy what you're going to eat in that week, for on a Sunday or whatever, right? You're oftentimes kind of stocking up. And then the food questionnaire was just kind of overall intake. I don't know what the time frame was.
Yeah, they really didn't go into much detail on that food questionnaire. What do they term it, the FFQ or something? They just kind of threw that out there without any real explanation, and I was totally lost.
Yeah, the only thing they really mentioned about it was that, it has previously been proven to be an accurate predictor of food behavior. But they didn't in that article explicitly say what questions were asked. But from what I understood, going back to what Brian was saying as well, is that they didn't try to measure intention to eat it, just kind of intention maybe to purchase it.
Did they also do receipts from like when they go out to eat, or was it just grocery receipts? Any food receipts?
Yeah, so sorry, I got kicked off again, so I'm back on my phone. But no, I think they just did grocery receipts. So that's another question I had, and a good point is, yeah, if you you bought all this stuff at the grocery store, but then you went out and ate really unhealthily all week, then that wouldn't be reflected.
I did that last week.
I would also just, since we're on this tangent about receipts and all that, it also depends how you prepare your food. Like, if I go buy a bag of apples, that's great. But if I make them into a pie, that's not the same nutrition level. So I would be more curious about the behavior of how people are preparing their food than what they just bought.
Yeah, on that note, like I eat a lot of vegetables, but I usually kind of cook them in butter because I am some French Canadian roots and everything deserves butter. So it's not the healthiest.
Hey, there's still vegetables. Yeah, and I think the other piece is, maybe Laura, you know more about this. I've looked a little bit at kind of food research in terms of food intake, and some of those questionnaires are notoriously difficult to sort of fill out. Like they ask you, how many, it's almost like when you read serving sizes, it's like, how many ounces of, some food do you eat? And people don't measure that. Or, like what's a serving size? Who knows? Like, I don't know if I eat a cup of cereal or 2 cups of cereal, or, so I think some of that stuff, even though those studies get studied for their reliability, this paper didn't really report on that aspect. They were more concerned about looking at the internal validity of their behavioral measure.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I read this, I just sort of glossed over how they measured the dietary factors. And now that I'm looking back at it, it's not super clear. They use the FFQ, which is the food frequency questionnaire, which is a validated measure that's been used, for a long time, but I can't really see how they combine that with the food receipt data. It's not clear to me from glancing at it anyway, but it is notoriously hard to measure people's dietary, what people are actually eating. And, I think they probably, it's probably reasonable given what the options are, but none of the options are great. Right. And I think that the food frequency questionnaire, I think, asks you what you usually eat over like the last month or I forget exactly how it does it, but it's sort of a generally, what are you eating kind of a thing. And there are more specific measures. Yeah, it's a hard thing to measure. I tried once to measure diets in, I think it was 5th graders, and it was a total flop. The kids could not tell us at all really accurately. And once I was involved in a study where we were trying to objectively measure food consumption by what kids, it's called plate waste. So you go to the cafeteria and you measure what kids throw away. You know how much they were served from the cafeteria, and you literally measure what they threw away. And then you assume they ate what's not there, but they don't just eat, they trade and they throw it at their friends. And, there's food on the floor, when elementary school kids have lunch. So it's just a really, really hard thing to measure.
Yeah, the way that they use the receipts actually, which was a really long, like labor intensive process, just blew me away, is that they went through every item on the receipt and then looked up the nutritional information for those items and then calculated the servings of fruit and vegetables, amount of fiber and amount of fat in each of those. But I'm thinking, in the interest of time, that we'll move on to one last discussion we wanted to have. And we'll skip the short quiz associated with this one because we're really interested to see what you guys have to say about this topic. So I'm really quickly gonna share my screen. All right, so we were interested in like some of the limitations of this study and how social cognitive theory focuses more on the social environment and not the physical environment, which may not take into account certain structural factors that affect food access and food consumption. And in the conclusion, they mentioned that interventions involving men or lower socioeconomic status participants might anticipate poor initial levels of nutrition. So we wanted to talk about a scenario, like what you guys would do is if you were to design a follow-up study to identify additional variables, how would you do it, and how would you do it incorporating critical race theory into the design to hopefully then be able to capture some of the structural, physical, environmental variables that social cognitive theory often overlooks?
I think when it comes to critical race theory, we kind of get back to this culture idea. So what Tahani was talking about it, a few sessions back, that the food that we put into our bodies is very culturally specific. And so if there's any way, even across just like the disparity gap of access, total access to food, but what is eaten and what is considered or perceived as normal to eat or unhealthy would be very interesting to separate the populations a little bit more accurately.
I think
oh, go ahead.
I don't know if I'm on the right track with this, but I feel like what you can eat is based on what you can obtain. And if you're looking, like there's transportation disparities in when you start applying race or socioeconomic status to things. Like people just can't get to places, or I guess food deserts, or what you could call them.
Yeah, I think both those points are really good, and I think we're maybe trying to steer the discussion towards the latter in terms of physical access. And going back to the introduction of the article, they just had this really simplistic kind of argument, like, well, hey, food's generally more accessible, it's cheaper, so why aren't people doing it? It's because their personal behavior and personal choices that are affecting that. When it doesn't take into account potentially the fact that people just don't have the access to it, much less the behavior.
Yeah, I would definitely say looking at distance to the grocery store, transportation options, because like if your grocery store isn't within walking distance, you have to take public transportation because you don't have a car, but you have a corner store or you have a fast food restaurant nearby. That's definitely going to impact what foods you choose to eat. And I mean, like I've lived in small towns where there was one place to grocery shop, and so what they had was what you got to eat. So that really does have an impact.
And it also, in talking about access, just the time resource of being able to prepare foods that are high in those fiber, fruits and vegetables. If you have limited time to be able to prepare a meal, then things that are faster, typically higher in preservatives and salts and fats, are going to be a lot easier to provide for your family.
Yeah, Maggie, I think that's a great point. And I feel like that time constraint, if you feel like I don't have time to prepare a healthy meal from scratch, that could very likely contribute directly to the construct of self-efficacy, the belief that I'm able to do these healthy behaviors if you don't have the resources, which could be time, access, like transportation, everything you guys were saying.
Yeah, so I think these are great discussions. And so I think getting back to, the question that Melissa posed in terms of, looking at how you might apply this or design the next step of this, I think it goes back to what we were talking about in the first discussion in terms of, like Lori was bringing up, you really need to study the behavior in the specific population that you're interested in intervening in. And so when this article concludes, that, oh yeah, if you're going to do these interventions and you have men or people of lower socioeconomic status, just anticipate poor nutrition, but it doesn't really get at why that might be. So, for potentially it could be important to do a study like this, but looking at different neighborhood types and different geographical areas to account for some of those physical barriers, and that would give you a much more targeted and generalizable intervention.
This is just an overall comment, I think, more on food deserts, is that I find it's interesting that a rural town and also maybe a neighborhood in a really concentrated urban center can have the same level of access or poor access to fruits and vegetables. The likelihood of finding, fresh produce or fruits out in a rural area, maybe there, is a lot of agriculture going on, but there's a really interesting video about community gardeners in Los Angeles who are growing fresh fruits and vegetables on the public sidewalks, like the grass that's owned by the city. Hello. And there might be something there that is worth talking about in terms of access for lower socioeconomic status. Sorry, I was distracted.
And you guys asked about critical race theory. Critical race theory would also tell us to look at how both the researchers' biases and how they ask the questions and how they measure things reflects their position, and then also how racism or perceptions of racism might, or the experience of racism might influence the whole situation.
I love this question that you pose, Melissa and Mark, and it just feels like probably like every sentence of this article could be, redone through that lens. I was just even struck, and maybe this is because it's a 2007 study and things we've just, that feels like a long time ago in terms of thinking about critical race theory and thinking about a lot, but even the demographics are listed 18% African-American. Well, who else? What's the assumption there? Is the assumption that everybody else is white? It's not even clear what who the demographics are. It's very, it feels like there's bias, and of course, Mark, that initial assumption that fresh food is available just feels like, really? Is it?
Yeah, or even that it's at a reasonable price for people to obtain. Like they said that it was about 25 cents a serving or something, but I don't know. You have to add like Maggie said, the time cost to that of both obtaining it and cooking it. And just if you really think that value, if that's the same value as having that time for other things or having to go to work.
All right,
Yeah, so it's all really good points. I think we're running up against the end of the class here, but thanks everyone for adding to the discussion. And I still think, it is an older article, but it seemed like a really good application of social cognitive theory. And, even though it's narrow and potentially limited in the generalizability, I think it probably does still provide, important kind of foundation to, to how food behavior interventions are applied, I would imagine. So.
Yeah, good discussion. Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's a helpful article for understanding how these things are approached. But yeah, I think, it usually takes people 2 years to publish anything. So anything you read, except all the COVID stuff, that stuff's really, so next week, one of the articles is a COVID article. So we know that's recent, but most of the stuff we're reading, even if it was published this year, it was done a couple years ago, and I think things have changed a lot in the last 2 years in a lot of different, well, yeah, obviously a lot of different ways. But yeah, we're usually reading stuff doesn't reflect today. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. See you in a week, and yeah, don't read your books. Have a good week. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lori.